the Iliad is a tale, along with its companion piece, the Odyssey, which we will also talk about at some point in the future as well. The Iliad is a story about struggle. It's about struggle. It's about conflict. It's about what conflict can reveal to us about ourselves and about our culture. In a lot of ways, the Iliad is the story about what happens when we don't realize some of the things that are going on, and then also about how we can overcome even in the midst of that. It's a story about transformation, and it's a story about the downfall of civilization. And then, just to give a little tease towards the Odyssey is sort of the other side of that same story. It's kind of the flip side of the coin of how we can then return home, about how civilization, about how culture can be restored even on the other side of catastrophe. So the Iliad, as we're thinking about this here today, is a story about conflict and about what can be revealed to us through conflict. And so what is the story of the Iliad? I want to just take a few minutes to talk about it here. And so for those who may be less familiar, the story of the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. And the Trojan War arises, this grand scale conflict, right? Because we think about what war is. War is conflict playing out on the most macro level. And so the Trojan War arises out of internal individual conflict. It's actually a conflict between two men, and those are Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and Paris, who's the prince of Troy, and they are, of course, fighting, as all too often is the case. They're fighting over a woman who is the famous Helen, the famous Helen, who is beautiful and is said to have had the face that launched 1,000 ships, right? And what that is, of course, in reference to is that Paris becomes enamored with Helen, the wife of Menelaus, and so he carries her off with him and takes her back to Troy. And of course, Menelaus is enraged by this, and so he gathers together all of the many heroes and kings and lords and people of Greece, and all of these city-states and these tribes. They band together and they form this massive armada, this great golden fleet of ships that sails across the sea, across the Aegean, to go and besiege Troy, to make war on the Trojans, and to bring Helen back home. And so this is the image that we see at the beginning of the stories, this fleet of ships out on the sea. And so I just want you to imagine this fleet of ships sailing out, and it's this image of this golden fleet and all of these generals and all of these heroes in their armor, and they're out there on their ships, and the sails are, they're in full sail, and they're going out across the sea. And there is this sense in which in the midst of all this pomp and splendor, there's this sort of assumption that this war is going to be over in no time, right? Like the Trojans don't stand a chance. This is the might of a unified Greece, of all of these mighty kings and warriors and their armies coming together to make war on the Trojans. And so it's going to be a quick, easy conflict. We're going to go over there. We're going to take the city. We're going to bring back Helen, and it's going to be a great victory and a great feather in the cap of Greece. Except, of course, for those who know the story, this isn't what happens. What instead happens is they sail their ships, they land, the conflict begins, and it's like from then on out, all hell breaks loose. Like everything goes wrong, and everything imaginable goes wrong, and the conflict drags on and on and on and on, and it ends up going on for 10 years. In a lot of ways, the Trojan War is sort of the archetype that is, that in a lot of ways, it's like the Vietnam of the ancient world, right? It's this war that's like, oh, it's going to be easy. It's going to be no problem. We'll just go and do this thing. And then it becomes this embroilment that just drags on and on and on and on. And the reason why, what's interesting about this, and what's so fascinating in the story, is the reason why it drags on and on. Like the reason why this struggle becomes this unending cycle of misery. And it's because of the division between the leaders of the Greek army. That all of these men, all of these heroes and so forth, with their armies and their warriors and their ships and so forth, they also come with egos, and they rub each other the wrong way over and over again. And they are constantly getting into these kinds of squabbles and skirmishes amongst themselves. We even see in the story, there's Homer gives us this kind of like peek behind the curtain where we get to see the gods, and the gods are like behind the scenes, and they're like pulling strings, right? They're playing favorites, and this one, is favors, Odysseus, and this one favors Achilles, and this one favors Agamemnon, and so forth. And they all have their kind of favorite team that they're sort of rooting for. And so so on the surface, it's this very natural kind of conflict that's going on, this very political sort of struggle, but behind the scenes there's this like spiritual civil war that's going on like underneath, and that's what's driving things, that's what's fueling things, and it's individuals, it's what's going on in the hearts of these men and the struggles between them. And there's this passage where we see a description of what it looks like as the Greeks are descending upon the fields of battle. And so we have this image of the ships, and then we have this image of tents assembling, and it says that they're like leaves. They're like leaves scattered across these fields of the Scamander. And that image of leaves, the image of tents, the image of ships, they're all really kind of evoking the same sort of idea, which is this image of something that at a distance looks unified, right? The armada of ships, it all looks like it's one thing that's all kind of sailing together off to battle in this way, or all of these tents and all of this entire army, or the leaves of a tree that all look unified together. Except here's the thing about all of them, they're not actually unified, right? A gust of wind could come and blow those leaves away. It could blow the tents or blow the ships, and the ships could be scattered, right? They could separate from one another and begin to fragment and begin to disperse across the water, or the leaves could be blown away across the plain. That's the image of unity, something that looks unified at a distance, but when you actually get close, you see that there's all this kind of fragmentation. There's all these things that are actually the potentials for division. And what the conflict with the Trojans reveals to the Greeks is it reveals divisions that are already there. Right? It reveals weaknesses. It reveals this sort of this weakness about the Greek civilization, which is that it is fraught with division. It is fraught with conflict. It is fraught with ego. There's all of these different powers that are playing against each other. And what looks unified from a distance, what looks like this golden armada of Greece that is so powerful, is actually fragmented, that there's all these little fragmentations, and what it takes is a conflict. It takes the battle, it takes the experience, the catastrophe of war to reveal the weakness that is already there. And a lot of times, we look at these kinds of things, we look at conflicts and we look at catastrophe and all of those sorts of things, and we look at them in a negative light. We think, oh, this is such a terrible thing, and in a lot of times it is. But what I want to talk about and what I want to kind of focus on here today is that there's actually an opportunity there, that there's an opportunity that wherever we see conflict, wherever we see struggle and division and disunity and all of those kinds of things happening, that there is an opportunity to understand something about what's going on beneath the surface. And this is the case for the Trojans, or this is the case for the Greeks in the Trojan Wars, that they begin to realize this about themselves. And so in a lot of ways, what is the story of like the downfall of Troy is actually the story of the downfall of Greece, even though, spoiler alert, the Greeks are the ones that win the war. What we start to see is, oh, these are the things that are actually plaguing that civilization. And I think it's the kinds of things that we actually see happening in the world today as well, that as we look at the modern world, as we look at our own experience here in the modern world, particularly here in the West, in the Western civilization, you look at Western civilization and there's so much about it that looks powerful and unified and golden and glorious and all of those kinds of things. And there are things about the modern world that are truly momentous and incredible. But at the same time, there's also conflict. And I think that in the conflict, and as we're seeing conflict grow, I think we've seen a lot more conflict growing over the past few decades, this sense of cultural unraveling, this sense of unrest and uneasiness. There's war in various places and societal upheavals and political struggles and all of these kinds of things that just seem to be intensifying, that we can look at those things and we could say, wow, this is really, terrible on the one hand, but on another level, that there's an opportunity for us to see something about ourselves, that there's an opportunity for something to be revealed to us about what's actually going on beneath the surface. If we're capable of looking a little bit deeper and saying, okay, so what is this actually revealing to us?